Thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode of the 4Ps, where I bring together things that matter in my life, things that I'm thinking about, or things that I just want to share. They typically cover something political, something personal, something practical, and professional topics, one per week. And as the 2020 election draws near, the broader social topics find their way into so many aspects of our lives. So let's get going. The 4Ps. Professional. Political. Practical. Personal. With so much at stake, we've never been more divided as a country. At any point in my lifetime that I can remember, and staying positive, productive, and prioritizing the right things now is still as important as ever. But it's getting hard. And this past weekend, it got even harder. Our country, our conscience, was shaken over the weekend with the passing of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I've called her the most important American, at least of this decade, and her loss could have a more far-reaching, just a more devastating impact than even she probably realized, despite her brilliance and her incredible vision. I've read almost everything written these past 5 days, and I also tried to write something and prepared it here, but I couldn't get comfortable with the words and the thoughts organized. So I've vacillated between grief and rage and fear and even motivation and other emotions, because when it comes down to it, we've been sitting on this powder keg, and RBG's death is really just a spark, perhaps the spark. I used to joke that RBG needed to be wrapped in a plastic bubble for the duration of the Trump presidency. And I don't know, maybe her family could have kept the news of her passing quiet for 6 more weeks, like Weekend at Bernie style. Oh, speaking of Bernie, though, ultimately, the situation in which we now find ourselves is a reminder that divided Democrats, we did this to ourselves. In 2016, progressives who couldn't get over Bernie losing in the primary and then refused to support Hillary Clinton and standing their ground, that got us into this mess. Well, these are the consequences. The future of the Supreme Court and civil liberties, women's reproductive rights. I mean, I am more terrified for our future than I ever have been. What this means for the election, it remains to be seen. But the die has been cast. Is it possible Joe Biden wins the presidency, Republicans lose the Senate, and McConnell jams through the nominee in some lame duck session? Of course. Can Democrats do anything at this point, really, other than complain? No, we can't. And despite what you'll hear from the left in the coming days, Chuck Schumer's power is exceedingly limited. My hope is that this rallies the complacent and the idealistic alike, and that we learn from these past mistakes. We've lost a lot of battles, but I've never given up hope. Yet this time, my faith in the future and our country, it's never been lower. Martin Luther King Jr. reminded us that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Change takes a long time, but it does happen. I truly don't see things getting better at the moment. Our civilization, by social and evolutionary definitions, is regressing. But hopefully, anything, can change my mind. And something professional. Earlier this week, I had the chance to talk with Amanda Goetz, who's the VP of Marketing at The Knot Worldwide. She's also, I like to call her an emerging superstar in the marketing industry. She's super smart. She's incredible on Twitter. I suggest you follow her. But in our one-on-one conversation that we did for a Brand Innovators event, I asked her if she could tackle or fix one business challenge right now in the industry, what would it be? And you might find the answer a bit surprising.
One problem and solution for it. I actually think there's a huge problem with, and sadly, I may be saying something that doesn't have a solution, but I'll get there. But
we can work on it together. It's fine.
Yeah, but I'm an extrovert, so I'll think this one through. But I do have a lot of empathy for marketers because, especially this past year, like every 8 to 12 weeks, we are rethinking, a kind or a strategy because of macro events that you can't control. And so I guess what I really am focused on that is, I think, a problem, and then I'll get to the solution, is empathy for social media marketers because they're on the front lines. They're taking the emotional load for the company, for the brand. They're the ones seeing the DMs, the comments, and that weighs on you, especially during, social injustice movements, and especially for a brand that, does play into that. Like, you are on the front lines, and I don't think that there is enough empathy and support for social media teams. They're working around the clock and they're also dealing with a lot of that emotional load. And so I guess the solution would be I try to speak about this a lot more, but leaders with more line of sight. Because I think that they're like, oh, social media, go do it. You're just posting, like, you're commenting, no big, but pour more line of sight into the emotional toll and the burnout that can happen, and how do we actually support that part, because social media has, think about it, like it's a newer role over the past 5 to 10 years, and now it's become the front lines of everything the brand does. It is customer service, it is, brand positioning. So yeah, I think that that's a big problem still, and that we've got to continue solving for.
Turn practical. I alluded to this last week, but the great thing about streaming platforms like Netflix is that it's giving a second life to many great television shows. The Emmys were a reflection of that, especially with how Schitt's Creek swept all the comedy awards, and everyone I know has watched it really only in the last year on Netflix. People like to say that with all the devices that we have at our disposal, right, that social media channels and streaming content options have made our attention spans shorter. I disagree. In fact, I think our attention spans are actually getting longer, not shorter. We're watching full series, multiple seasons of series, all in sort of one batch. I haven't watched any of the films or documentaries because I actually want something that will hold my attention for a lot longer. I watched all 8 seasons of The 100 while getting back into my exercise and fitness routine. I'd previously been on the CW like the last 8 years before I finally even discovered it. Same with The Good Place and Lucifer. Of course, Netflix does have some other great shows that they've repurposed, and even original shows. 3%, I'm watching Away, and yes, Cobra Kai. It's the #1 show these past few weeks. Unfortunately for me, I was on the other end of that discoverability spectrum, having watched both seasons when they first debuted on YouTube before it came to Netflix. But what does this prove? That linear TV programming is no longer necessary, or that it won't be for much longer? I don't know. Netflix still needs to buy up longer running shows to add to its library, but how networks can keep up when Netflix is both a friend and a competitor, I don't know either. Either way, I must have learned about 10 new shows from the Emmys that I cannot wait to start on. I think my queue and playlist right now is even longer than my growing attention span. Something personal. If you recall, going back to early February, I've been a vocal proponent and an advanced advocate of canceling and shutting down certain events as COVID broke and then spread. I called for shutting down school and sports long before others, then summer camps, right? And while I've been all in for the reopening of schools this fall in my area, thanks to really a very low positive test rate, the numbers are back on the rise. So the question is, will we need to cancel Halloween? I am in no way ready for this because as a parent, Halloween really is the best holiday. We can do it smart, we can do it safe. For those watching with whom I went to high school, you'll remember how we created Safe Halloween, right, for the kids in our neighborhood? Well, we can make this one safe too. We aren't canceling unless we absolutely have to. So what are some easy tips? First, all trick-or-treaters should have masks. costumes, and be prepared not to ring doorbells or approach front doors. Those who are welcoming trick-or-treaters with candy at their home must maintain some degree of distance and masking protocols as well. And here's how. This is what I put up at our house already this past weekend. It's a Halloween candy shoot for socially distanced trick-or-treating. We'll set up a table in front of the steps, blocking them and then distributing one piece of candy at a time. It's contactless, it's safe, it's still fun and kind of spooky, I don't know. 6 feet of PVC pipe, some spray paint, zip ties, and you're ready to go. And we're only 6 weeks away from Halloween. I promise you, if you do this right, no one has to come near your door.